Well, the first obligation that I have, or the first reason for even looking at this situation, is that it's architecture, and very beautiful, compelling Shaker architecture. Some of the most enduring architecture of the eastern United States is right in front of me. And I'm aware every day of the picture that won't be here tomorrow. And I'm trying to take advantage of that. Tomorrow, or a week from now, or a month from now, these leaves will be gone. So they become an important part of this picture. Can I take a picture of this building today that I can't take next week? The wind's blowing right now, and I think about a time exposure. If I give a time exposure to this, a long time exposure, the leaves blur, the building remains static, and it says something about the enduring quality of the architecture and the enduring quality of the Shaker ideals. That's nice. In these history stories, it seems like eternally trying to eliminate things. It's the art of elimination, as well as the art of inclusion. Edgar Allan Poe had a theory of poetry, and he said that everything in the poem should contribute to the predetermined mood or content of the poem. That if the subject was horror, the words should not only be about horror, they should sound horrific. And if it was about happiness or joy, or whatever the poet wanted the poem to be about, then the look of the word and the sound of the word and the feel of the word, as well as what the word meant, should be about that. And if we're talking about a spirit-based, deliberate community, the Shakers in this case, then everything that we see in the picture should reinforce that. Everything should be about that. I've never taken a photography class. I majored in English and I minored in journalism. I learned photography by making mistakes. My first assignments had widespread, fundamental, redundant errors throughout the whole take. But there were great high points too. I'm talking about the Newfoundland assignment now. That assignment established the kind of photography that I was to go on to do the rest of my career. The themes that I photographed on that assignment are the themes that I still photograph. What I learned and what I was attracted to and what I became as a photographer has something to do with beauty. It's a beauty that's touched by elegy, but free, I think, of sentiment, sentimental values. A beauty that's unexpected. I get the feeling that a photographer whose theme in any way has to do with beauty feels like that he or she must apologize for it. And I'd like to demolish that idea. I felt that way, and I'd like to demolish it within myself. The photographers that I most admired when I was coming up were social documentarians. If I could summarize what they spent their lives doing, I would say that it was about social justice and economic justice, racial justice, political justice. And of those things, if I may summarize it, I would say that their message was, of these things in this world, there is too little. But does anybody think that there's too much beauty, too much grace, too much quiet, too much eloquence? I find very little of it, and I think that it's endangered. dying a quiet death or a noisy death, departing. And I've photographed it as I've seen it. When I first picked up a camera, I realized that photography, still photography, was a simple transaction between me and the visible world through a very simple camera. I could take that same camera on assignment now and have the same experience. Photography has not changed that much. I carry a tripod. That's about the only thing that's changed. I've gotten to the point where I always like to have a tripod around. I frequently use it. It allows me to take a certain kind of photograph. Not only could I not take that photograph without a tripod, I've gotten to like that photograph creatively or for its own intrinsic reasons. I didn't set out to photograph cultures, to photograph people in particular. Nevertheless, I did. And those cultures had something in common. They were all vanishing. My first assignment was in Newfoundland. They were moving whole fishing villages on barges to so-called growth centers where there was going to be a fish cannery. Well, these villages had been there for more than 200 years. Generations of fishermen had lived there. A lovely life. That was over. In every way, to me it was a very elegiac situation. The end of the doryman. The end of the small outport fishermen of Newfoundland. That was my introduction to the idea that has trailed me or that I've pursued around the world in culture after culture. I've seen it in Newfoundland. I've seen it in the South Pacific, where I photographed the Namba people. Seen it in Tierra del Fuego, where I saw the last full-blooded Indians. Seen it in the Soviet Union. I've seen it in Montana. And here I am sitting in a room that was built with eternal values, as eternal as architecture can get. This room is. Interest in the Shaker people and what they stood for, what they believed in, and what they built, and what they left is more, there's more interest in it now than there ever has been. More is being written on it, more is being published, more people are coming here. Why? Because if there's one thing that's been taken out of our society, it's simplicity. And this Shaker song, Simple Gifts, could be an anthem for what's not available in suburban and urban and modern American life. And people come here to savor something that's unavailable anywhere else. I want my photographs to simply dignify what's already dignified. Whenever I get a story like this that's involving a lot of interiors, I get apprehensive because I can't light. One of the disadvantages of never having taken a photography class is that you can't do a lot of things. I could save time and energy if I just simply learned lighting someday, artificial lighting. But it invades this basic transaction that I first felt photography was all about, which was light, me, camera in between. If you bring lights in, artificial lights, suddenly you're creating it and you're amending it, you're influencing it, you're changing it. And that whole honesty of and simplicity of you and the light is gone. What to do about it? Well, my apprehension went away immediately upon coming to my first Shaker village in Maine, and then also at the second place in New Hampshire. And here in Kentucky, I feel it all over again, and that is the glow of gratitude toward these Shakers. These houses, as someone said, were made for light. They were made with light. Light is a part of the architecture here. If light can be said to be spiritual, then I think we're under the spell of that right now. Even though this is not a church. It's a simple storage area in an attic. We photographed this cupola from outside, and it was a wonderful foreground detail. Now it's the subject of the picture. And when it becomes a subject, it's got to be done in a very compelling way, because there's no background, there's no foreground. This is the entirety of the picture. This is the whole thing. So let's have a look at what it looks like straight from below. It's a graphically interesting picture. It's a little bit mysterious, unorthodox angle. No one sees it from this angle particularly. It's the kind of picture I think that is hard to sell inside a story to an editor, just because it's a little bewildering. And the editors have the reader in mind as well as the photographer. Photographer might not be bewildered by the angle, but the reader might well be. The good thing about working at the Geographic is that I think the editors there, who see a lot of photographs, don't want to be bored, and they don't want me to be bored. So if we see a picture like this, it doesn't matter if it's unorthodox. In fact, that's a positive advantage, and we're encouraged to take these pictures. I think I could have been satisfied in photography if my pictures had no other theme other than light. My first memories are of my home, the home in which I grew up, looking out through starched, stiff curtains that my mother handmade. There's something to looking through things. I don't know what it is. And framing devices, and curtains, and window glass, and seeing through windows, looking out of things and through things, is one of my most favorite things to do as a person and as a photographer. That has everything to do with light, something secondarily to do with color. It's a very dark part of the picture, black hole really, and the beautiful thing is that the viewer's eye, if it's all like mine, will go straight into that blackness and be well rewarded by a very warm glow. Well, the problem here is balancing the light. Is the fire, all I want to do is suggest the fire, so I'm going to get the edge of it, the coals, and try to just get a flame or two, because if I come over here, I think it's over bright. An effect that you can't see through the viewfinder because of the long time exposure and the movement of the light in terms of the fire, light, movement of it on the bread and on the surface of that bench and on the bricks and so forth. And it's always a pleasure to take pictures like that because they're not predictable. And I like things that aren't predictable. The pictures that I can live with the longest are the pictures that I can't memorize. And that's probably true across the board in life. With people, with events and episodes and enterprises that you have in life. If you can memorize them, they just aren't going to stay in your mind. They don't intrigue you. You don't keep wondering about them. There's a picture here of a Japanese, from the Hagi Japan assignment. It's a photograph of a tree in a courtyard. Beyond the tree is a tile roof. And the tree and the tile roof are seen through irregular antique glass, which is clear. And framing that is opaque Japanese glass of a traditional Japanese window. Well, that's a very documentary picture. But it has some transcendent quality. It seems to be symbolic of, one, Japanese design, and two, the enigma that seems to be built into the quality of Japanese sensibility and design. I believe they have the gift of infusing what they do with, to me, mystery. And it is a very beguiling mystery. It's very seductive. It draws me forward. And I can live with that picture longer than many of my other photographs because I can't memorize it. It vibrates. It vibrates optically, and it vibrates culturally. That idea of taking something mundane and seeing something in it that is transcendently different, that is the high ground of photography to me. That's the most difficult, the most challenging, the most exciting kind of photography. I've come close a few times. There are pictures of mine that please me. They're poems of mine. I'm thinking of that picture of the seal pelts. What that picture seems to me to be is a tapestry or a mural. It has a higher level, and I can live with that picture. And I don't live on the lower level, the gruesome level, the documentary level. But that's where it begins. And that, to me, is the beauty of documentary photography, is that it begins with realism. You have to see in those seal pelts the potential for a mural. There's a funny footnote to that. I didn't see that until 3 years later. I didn't value it enough to pull it out of the initial edit. Neither did the picture editor. 3 years went by before I went back through that film and found it sitting there, which gets us into the whole process of editing and what editing teaches us and what editing can accomplish. Editing is where you discover your strengths and weaknesses. You discover your style inside editing. Style isn't everything. It's your sensibility for organizing the picture is revealed. As a byproduct of editing, which I intensely believe in and practice as hard as I practice photography, I slowly learned that there was a unifying structure underneath my pictures. This pleased me because it proved something that I had a suspicion of. And what it proved was that the pictures weren't dependent on being in Japan or Russia or Shakertown or Montana. That they could be anywhere and they would be unified by principles of composition, by taste, by photographic values that are my own. And what are those? That I set up pictures universally, almost irresistibly, on a horizontal plane, which, in addition to being something that I do, happens to break one of the most cardinal rules of classical composition. I also lay down at the base of this horizon line a pyramid. It could be the prow of a canoe. It could be a sheep truck in Tierra del Fuego. It could be anywhere. It transcends wherever I am. Something else I noticed was how simple my color palette is. You know, I was, for 15 years, a black and white photographer, And my idea of a good black and white photograph when I went to, or a good color photograph when I went to Newfoundland was a photograph with no color in it. And the picture of the doryman is without color. And that composition deserves a comment too. The composition of the big, looming foreground figure and the little doryman. 18 years later, I was still taking the same picture. It's identically the same composition. But during that time, I was trying to add complexity and content and depth to that basic composition. Probably the most fundamental part of that picture, the foundation of that picture, is the gray sky. Without that gray sky, there is no photograph. Blue is a very dominant and destructive color. Gray is not. Gray is very compatible. And it gives a very graceful kind of light to the scene. And I can see up under these hats. Then that green grass is the second most important part. It's uninterrupted by barbed wire fences or pickup trucks or barn buildings. So you've got as seamless a setting as Montana can give you. It's as seamless as the North Atlantic. On top of that seamless setting, I followed a single character, and that's the man with the knife in his mouth. I just followed him. And that's the third aspect of that photograph. With him comes his partner, who's on the left side of that frame. Beneath them is a calf. That's the foundation of the picture. It's a fluid foundation. It's going to move. It is moving. But the other elements in the picture, the middle ground, the deep background of the horse and the rider, and especially that red bucket, those are even more fluid. And this is an ideal of photography, or it is as close to an ideal of photography as I think I will ever come. And that is the Bresson idea of the decisive moment. And it's the school that all of my colleagues and I came up under. It's the kind of photograph that we admired the most. Am I good at it? Well, I work at it. I actually take another kind of picture better. The photography that I've grown to like and do the most of requires patience. And photography attracts impatient people. I was an impatient person. I still am, in part. But photography has slowed me down and allowed me to see and experience life in a way that I couldn't have if I had never involved myself with photography. I wait for light. I'll wait for color. I'll wait for people to walk into a situation. On this plaza, I waited for the woman to come around a blind corner and finish the composition. A few years later, I was in Virginia and photographing a woman with a dazzling hat. And while I was photographing her, a runaway horse came by and finished the composition. These boys dressed in costumes were not in the composition as I first framed it. In fact, there was nothing but blackness. But I framed the composition minus them and waited until they emerged from inside the temple. Same with the girls and the umbrella. This is a whole way of taking pictures. It's not hunting by walking through the woods. It's sitting in a blind and waiting till the picture comes to you. Now with the tripod, at midpoint in my career, I find that I'm evolving more toward a view camera mentality. Even though I think I'll always use this little 35, some people think it looks ridiculous for me to have a big tripod and a little camera. The whole thing is wrong looking to them. And a 35mm camera was invented to run and gun with. That's the whole purpose of it. If you're going to be a view camera photographer, have a view camera. But I really like that little camera. I like everything about it. I don't need to have a big camera to take big pictures. And I just need to have the right idea about time and patience, to have the power of observation that's necessary, to be aware of what I'm looking at and also what I'm not looking at. I know now better, after 20 years of photography, when I'm in the presence of a picture. And I know not to leave that. I search less and stand more now. I know when there's potential, and I'm willing to work on it a long time sometimes, and to come back. I don't mind coming back. I like coming back. Everyone approaches a story differently. A very accomplished, esteemed photographer told me when I went to do the Tolstoy story, he said, and he shook his finger at me, he said, "And you will read every word that Tolstoy wrote." Well, I agreed with him because I know that's his approach. But mine is different than his. I read just enough Tolstoy to be intrigued by Tolstoy. I read just enough about his life so that I wasn't bored with it, so that I didn't have it memorized. I leave a lot of open spaces in there, a lot more than I think anybody else does. And it's in that open space that anything can happen. There's a downside to that, I know. I'm missing things, but there's a great upside to it. For me, temperamentally, photographically, I like being surprised. Discovery is, what's discovery worth? It's worth, to me, 1,000 hours of research. If you see a picture that you think might be a picture, the worst thing you can do is not take it. Take it, decide later. Photography is all about, or part of it is about responding to things. And you have to honor that response. If you think it's interesting, if it stops you visually, take it right then and take what you see. And then worry about improving it later. Anybody who's seen me work know that film goes through my camera. Too much film. But it's work. I'm working. I'm working mentally, and I'm working emotionally, and I'm working mechanically. You can be a photographer and take far fewer pictures than I do. But the simple mechanical practice of putting film through a camera is attached now to my way of thinking about photography. I think as I take. I'm looking as I'm doing. It's evolving. Simple gifts. Photography is one of those simple gifts to me. It has not, in my hands, grown very complex. It has retained the simplicity it had when I first picked up a camera. That's a simple gift.